Good morning. This is Alexandra Talleyrand for the Abolition News Network on this fine spring day, May 25th, 1807, to welcome the man who will be known as the one who executed a 10-year successful undertaking to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain. Welcome, William Wilberforce.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
So, Mr. Wilberforce, I know that this was the 11th attempt to abolish the slave trade through Parliament that you succeeded in accomplishing this May. No small feat. That raises questions, especially how you persisted on this course of action and you didn't give up.
Ms. Talleyrand, I think I have to start with giving you an understanding as to when slavery came to my attention when I was 14 and wrote to a newspaper in New York condemning the slave trade. A Pennsylvania Quaker by the name of Anthony Bezenet published a book called An Inquiry into the Rise and Progress of the Slave Trade. He had convinced his own church that slavery was wrong.
All right, and now what about your meeting with Thomas Clarkson?
Yes, it was later I met Clarkson, who had formed the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787. This is the logo which was created by Josiah Wedgwood, and the logo states that, "Am I not a man and a brother?" He was visiting the members of Parliament, the MPs in London, who he thought might be sympathetic to the abolition of the slave trade. Later, we became best friends.
All right, now let's get to why you decided to dedicate your life to this cause, the abolition of the slave trade.
Alexandra, can I call you Alexandra?
Certainly.
That began with my religious conversion to evangelicalism, which placed responsibility on every believer to make the world a better place, whether by spreading the gospel or by helping people out.
I understand. And what influenced you in that direction?
I read a book called Rise and Progress of Religion, which asked, "Is the love of God the governing principle of my life?" That got me thinking. I learned how far my day-to-day conduct fell below God's standard of perfection. I was living the life in Parliament of idleness, getting votes in exchange for gifts and money. It was time to change.
And we understand you did?
Yes, it was 1787. I was 28 years old and full of energy. It was suggested that I bring the issue of the slave trade before Parliament. I did, and it was defeated, no matter how good my arguments were. I showed them this model of a slave ship, how it was packed with slaves so they could neither sit up nor lie down. As a matter of fact, Ms. Talleyrand, can I borrow your receptionist to help demonstrate these cufflinks?
Okay, Miss Bloom, can you come in here and assist us, please?
Yes, this won't hurt a bit. How do you do? May I have your right wrist this time? And I would like to demonstrate these iron cufflinks, which the slaves were forced to wear day in and day out.
I don't really feel good about this.
Well, don't worry. We'll take these off eventually. Now, this was attached to both hands, of course, but this was attached to the other slaves on the ship, day in and day out. Thank you very much.
So back to your story. Now you had to go out and work harder?
Yes, I did. I presented a major anti-slave trade bill on May 12, 1789, for which I gave a 3.5-hour speech stressing that we are all to blame for permitting human traffic, which, for the good intentions of the owners of the plantations, was cruel and destructive. In my final argument, I said that my principle was the command of God, which is above all politics. Still, the bill was defeated on April 18, 1791.
What did it take to finally win them over?
To make a long story short, it was a little shy of 20 years we got Parliament to move their opinion that slavery was contrary to the principles of justice, humanity, and sound policy. The House of Lords and the House of Commons voted overwhelmingly to put an end to the British trade. It ended them supplying and importing slaves into the colonies so that the departure of any slave vessel was prohibited after May 1st, 1807, this year.
Well, this is really awesome. So this was all accomplished this year, right? So I have one last question. How did religion play a part in all of this?
I would say that when I converted to evangelical beliefs, that Christian principles should be applied to all areas of life. As an evangelical, I need to show that my whole heart is engaged in the world around me, which includes performing my parliamentary duties with increased diligence and conscientiousness.
Mr. Wilberforce, this is a credit to you for your overriding sense of duty to God to go to extraordinary lengths to defend the slaves, as slavery is an assault on Christian values and society. This is Alexandra Talleyrand for ANN saying good morning.
I'm the receptionist for ANN, and I also did some research on the abolition trade slave story. The argument against abolishing the trade were so strongly presented in the House of Commons that it may be of interest to our viewers what they were in summary. Although I must say these are very disturbing. Warning. It was like poverty. It would always be with us. It was unpleasant business without any alternative. Many members of the House of Lords owned plantations in Jamaica and Barbados in the Caribbean. Most Africans were stupid and would eat all day if food were put before them, but if not, they would not complain. The Negro's mind is vacant, not burdened with the power of anticipation, so continual whipping was less pleasant than we might think. Africans needed slavery to give them something to do in Africa. Slavers brought invaluable goods to trade with for those in Africa. 4 out of 5 slaves would be in continual torpor if not provoked by thirst or hunger. Many people sold to slave traders were convicts and would be executed if the British didn't offer them some alternative, such as the Caribbean. Negroes are a species of the human race, but they are inferior and a very different order of men. Was sugar profitable enough, it was cheaper to flog a half a dozen years out of a malnourished slave than to buy another one when he died. Christianity and the embracing of the gospel does not make the least difference in civil property. Even if one could point out the hardships in the slave lifestyle, their lot was better than working poor in Britain. So why all the fuss? The most popular argument against abolition in the British Parliament was that the trade would simply to be taken over by the French.
Thank you, Ms. Plum. Good morning.